Welcome up Carolyn Staines from Federation University. Carolyn's going to talk about digital solutions for agriculture, soil health implications for surface spraying effluent. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Oh, should be.
Is that on? Yes.
Yes, it's
excellent. So the project I'm talking about was supported by Australia Pork Limited. Now, the pork industry produces substantial amounts of effluents and waste, and this does present a challenge for the industry. Thank you. But can it be viewed as an opportunity? So Australian Pork Limited were interested in exploring using effluent as a valuable resource, and they were in particular interested that if it were used in this way, would it contribute to their sustainability goals? So the alternative use was using it as a fertiliser, spreading the effluent on farmland to fertilise crops. And APL wanted to know, they asked us to find out, what is the current knowledge globally about using effluent in this way and its impact on soil? And is this practice common in Australia? And thirdly, what are the impacts on this practice on soil in Australian conditions? So to answer the first question, we did a literature review to find out what thoughts were or what research was about the use of effluent, piggery effluent. And the literature suggested that there were benefits, but there were also problems. So the main benefits were superior soil chemistry, better physical properties, and improvements in biological properties. The negative effects were if you have high nutrient loading, that presents a pollution risk if there's a runoff into waterways. And it can be the source of various diseases and pathogens which do pose risks for animals, humans and plants. And also there's a possibility of accumulation of heavy metals in the soil. So the second question was, do Australian farmers, producers use this method? And to do that, we thought, well, we'll talk to some producers and ask them about their practices and experiences using effluent as fertiliser. Now, the problem was to talk to people, you really need contact details. And we found that APL were not able to give us any contact details of producers because of privacy concerns. And you think, oh, well, look on the internet. We did look on the internet. The pork industry is sensitive in that they're concerned about animal rights issues, and they like to keep a rather low profile. And in fact, there's very little contact information available on the internet. And we also subsequently heard that pig producers have time limitations, as I'm sure all producers do, and there's a bit of a reluctance to get involved in that sort of research undertaking. So one thing we felt on the basis of our experience, this probably suggests in this sort of sensitive industry, there's a need to perhaps take a co-design approach so that you've got stakeholders involved at all stages and they can have a sense of buy-in and ownership. But eventually we did manage to talk to 5 producers. It's not an impressive number, but it was sufficient for us to get some useful information. So the results of those conversations, they identified some benefits. It was seen as a good tool in their effluent management methods. Is one way of making use, because dealing with effluent is a considerable challenge for them. And those who'd used it did report improvements in soil and in crops. They felt it can be useful in reducing fertiliser costs, but that was complicated because it was relative to the cost of the synthetic fertilisers at any given time. And one producer, interestingly, reported it was useful for pest control. Yeah, no, I won't go into it. It gets too complicated, but that was an interesting finding. The negatives were that it's actually effluent's difficult to handle compared with synthetic fertilisers. It's difficult to transport and disperse. And the need to balance the application and the cropping so that you don't get nutrient overload. They found that it can cause lodging of crops and leaf burn if you apply it at the wrong time. There were some reports of high salt load and odour issues. Well, what impact does it have on soils in Australia? So to look at this, we conducted a soil health study looking at 5 pork producer sites in Victoria, measuring salinity, acidity, soil structure, carbon content, nutrients, micronutrients, and heavy metals. So the method was to compare soil samples from paddocks that had been commonly had effluent applied with paddocks that had little or no effluent applied. So the results were lots and lots and lots of tables and graphs, but in summary, it was found that salinity did increase, but not to the level that you would call the soil saline. And similarly, there was an increase in acidity, but not abnormal for the uses these soils were had. Soil structure, there was no evidence of a negative impact on soil in the short term, but there was some concern about what might be the case in the long term. Carbon content was really, the increase was only slight, and it was only in some paddocks. Nutrients was generally found to increase nutrients concentrations in all paddocks. Micronutrients, only some, not in others. And heavy metals, while some increased, there was no increase in other heavy metals. So the conclusions from the study were that there was sufficient evidence to indicate that piggery effluent is recognised globally as an important agricultural resource, but that appropriate management is key to preventing the problems and to maximising the benefits you can get from its use. And that management is complex, and it needs to take account of a large array of factors. And importantly, the decisions need to be made on a property by property basis, and they might not be appropriate for all locations in that property, and they might not be appropriate for all times of the year. We also wanted to point out, on the basis of our experience, future research into this sensitive industry may need the involvement of stakeholders in all stages and development and implementation of these studies. Now, the results of this project can be found on the Australian Pork website. You can download a full report of the study. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Carolyn. We're